speaking to you today because of the support of so many smart, courageous and resilient female role models and mentors who have enriched my working and broader life in so many ways. As our Women in Tech WA say, if you can see her, you can be her. I'm sorry I could not join you in person today for this incredibly important and exciting female founders session by Core Sprint. A huge positive, though, is the fact that digital technology is opening up new ways to forge global, national, and international collections and supporting more inclusiveness and diversity. And the COVID-19 universe that we find ourselves in has put this into sprint mode. My team at NERA are passionate about diversity. NERA is Australia's independent and industry-led growth centre for the energy resources sector, and we are working with our stakeholders to build a networked and collaborative innovation ecosystem, accelerate the commercialisation and deployment of innovation and technologies, and fast transfer knowledge and technologies across industry sectors such as resources, space and defence. And this cross-industry fertilisation and diversification is so important. And finally, we are working to enable a globally competitive, a technology-led, a decarbonised and a just energy future for all Australians. But we can only create our vision for Australia by striving hard to enable diversity. Our increasingly digitally enabled and technology-led industries and sectors will only flourish through multidisciplinary approaches, building collaborative teams and to build team skills, and by bringing together a wide range of perspectives and experiences. We need Australia's females to go for it, as Julia Gillard said recently with the WA Tech, Women in Tech, and to actively seek role models to help them understand the challenges and barriers that they're going to face over their life and their career, and share practical strategies to help overcome them. So a final comment: it's important that you have self-confidence, but know also that we all have self-doubt sometimes. Just keep them in perspective. So now to the exciting bit. Let me introduce Alex Moss, CEO of Canaria Technologies, who's going to be your main speaker today. Alex is CEO of Canaria Technologies and is one of the early leaders in predictive biometric systems. Alex has been noted by the BBC as the model changing the future of space medicine. 2019 saw Alex recognised by The Australian as one of the leading 3 inventors working in Brisbane, and by Vogue Australia, no less, as one of the world's top young innovators in technology. She's also a passionate role model, and I think that's an important point, for women in technology, and she regularly mentors and runs events to promote female leadership in STEAM subjects. Just to give you a little bit more, she's established her specialisation in applying high accuracy AI-enabled medical grade devices in the heavy industries to predict serious medical incidents in workforces before they happen. For example, predicting heat exhaustion and extreme cognitive fatigue in the aerospace, defence and resources sector. The Canaria Technologies is a partner with both universities of Oxford and Cambridge to explore and validate the use cases. So I'm going to leave it there. I think that it's already given you a hint of just how exciting Alex's career is and what she can share with you today. So I wish you all best for the day, and I look forward to hearing about it. Goodbye.
Thank you, Miranda. And now, after this great introduction, Alex, all yours.
Beautiful. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us all today. There's not much I can add to that introduction. I think she did me better justice than I could probably ever do myself in an introduction. So what I wanted to speak to you all about today was not just a chronological narrative about what the journey of my company's been, but I wanted to do it almost as a series of poems and fables with lessons learned afterwards that can be directly useful to you in the early stages of your business, from idea formulation right the way through to when it's time for you to raise your seed capital round. So with that in mind, I will attempt to share my screen and get into Yep, share computer sound, optimize, and get into this.
Just quickly,
So,
Alex, before you start, for everyone, if you do have questions, please start putting them in the Q&A section, and then after the talk, Alex will be able to answer.
beautiful, which I'm looking forward to. So, yep, Alex Moss, I'm CEO of Canaria Technologies, Predictive Biometric Systems, and I had a quick video to show you all today of a minute long to give you a more visual taste about what it is that my company does. So let's jump in.
I'm Alex Moss, CEO of Canaria Technologies. Cognitive fatigue and heat exhaustion causes 2/3 of all fatalities in the heavy industries. No one has yet launched a solution, nor used the valuable data from these life or death situations to develop algorithms for use in medical research. Canaria Technologies combines medical wearable devices with AI to predict medical incidents 10 minutes before they happen. We're spearheading a new field of technology to create a world where you know when your employee is about to fall asleep at the wheel of the vehicle, or that your father is about to have a heart attack. We started by making vital signs monitors for NASA. Our earpieces learn when our users' bodies are about to reach their physical limits and send alarms before they get to a critical state. My motives, my business, draw from the need always to do better.
So I hope that you all heard that, but regardless, let's jump in. In the beginning, there were 3 co-founders of Canaria Technologies. We met in 2016 at a NASA hackathon in London, where I went on stage and pitched my initial concept for what would become my company's flagship product of the Canaria earpiece, capable of predicting heat exhaustion and cognitive fatigue in our users. At that time, however, no one had done anything like that, and I was almost laughed off the stage by a group of relatively eminent engineers and academics. However, my 2 co-founders were in the audience, and they really resonated with what I was doing, and we had a good working relationship for a really fast-paced 48 hours, where the only sleep to break was about 3 hours underneath a desk at one point, whilst we got together the initial circuit board designs for a vital signs monitor that was worn behind the ear that we were optimizing for use aboard the International Space Station, which at that time was actually focused on picking up and predicting carbon monoxide poisoning in astronauts. With a really hurried sprint, by the end of that 48 hours, we had functioning CAD designs, we had electronic schematics design, and we went from having been almost laughed off the stage the day before to winning the national NASA award for the UK that year, and we went straight into the global finals at that point. Another dizzy period after that, we ended up becoming the NASA global winner for best use of hardware in 2016, which was a huge accolade that we remain very proud of. We beat 2,000 other projects to that prize, which really kickstarted the career. So for the first year, things seemed to go relatively well as we surmounted the really steep learning curve that was getting the hang of setting up an early stage technology company. We launched a patent in the US really quickly, and we went about the journey of validating, of making prototypes, of trying to find investors. Eventually, this led to us through a series of misadventures spanning interactions with Richard Branson and also some early stage Silicon Valley Twitter investors to find out that the best place for us was here in Australia and here in Brisbane, where I am today. We got an amazing offer from our first group of Australian investors who gave us 10 days to decide whether we were going to move to Australia or not, at which point, if we had not moved by that point, their investment offer would be revoked. Fair enough, 2 of us went over. Unfortunately, we ran into co-founder issues, and this led to a blow up of our technical development, and this led to one of my co-founders and I having to forcibly remove the other one, whereby we had to navigate a lawsuit that was launched against us. We picked ourselves up, we carried on, and we changed out the founding team to a group of talented Australians who I personally consider to be the Australian founders of the company. But the reason I'm saying this is because the most common problem that all of you who are entrepreneurs are going to run into are founder issues. So how do you navigate this? Firstly, the thing to be aware of is almost all founding teams change in the first year of business. This is completely normal. It needs to be expected. You need to make sure that you have a strong co-founder and co-founders who complement your skill set. So for instance, where I was business and design, my co-founders were pure electronics engineering and research. What I wish someone had told me when I was setting up my business, that I hope that you will take note of, is having a vesting shareholder agreement in place means that no co-founder owns any shares in the company until 1 year has passed, at which point small chunks of those shareholdings are then allocated, which means that you have at least a year's worth of a grace period to go through all the founder problems that you need to run through, navigate them easily, switch out your team as many times as you need without ever having to risk court cases or think about nasty buyouts down the track. Finally, that the 50-50 split is a lie. It may seem egalitarian in everyone's interest, but in practice it's not, and tends to cause resentment quite quickly on. To compensate for this, allocate shareholdings according to how much work each founder is putting in and how valuable these outcomes are to the business, and discuss these expectations early. In theory, there's no difference between theory and practice. Before we went out to our first test in a mine site, we ascertained that cognitive fatigue was the big problem that we could solve where there wasn't really a viable solution yet. The problem with this is that there had been some not so effective solutions on the market and some attempts as early as 15 years before we got onto the field. So this meant that we were going into an industry where there was already a bit of a bad reputation around cognitive fatigue detection, let alone prediction, which is what we were doing with our artificial intelligence systems. We were a little bit bummed out about this, but knew that it was the right place to start, until our first trip to a mine site. And it was only in that experience, so we were in the field, getting our hands dirty, talking to everyone that we could, showing them our product, getting feedback, that yes, although cognitive fatigue was a problem, the bigger problem, where there wasn't any solution on any marketplace yet, was heat exhaustion. And I was out there with my technical team, and we realized really quickly that with some small alterations to our product, we could not only add the ability to detect heat exhaustion, but once we had a robust enough data set, we could predict heat exhaustion in our users 10 minutes before it happened. So all of our assumptions, or rather a good chunk of our assumptions that we had, were completely overturned when we went on site. And we discovered there was a huge new opportunity for us. And as soon as we realized that we could do this and started working on it, we then started getting cold contacts from a lot of clients in aerospace, resources, and defense who went, so I've heard that you're working on heat exhaustion. It's a huge problem for us and we've not seen a solution for it yet. Can we have a meeting with you? And it was only at that point that we really had a breakthrough of knowing that we had a serious business. And when we were struggling to close contracts in the past, they suddenly started closing really easily. And we were finally able to get to a point of having more consistent revenue and be able to grow more confidently. So the lesson behind this is you want to validate your theories in the field. Clients don't know what they want until you show them something. So show them something at every meeting whilst you're refining your product and make changes on their feedback. And once you're in the field, how much of an issue is your problem solving really? Conversely, is the problem you're solving more valuable than you think that it is? Related really common problem with young founders under the age of about 35 is they tend to undervalue their products. So one of the things that we found was that the accidents that we were preventing were costing a lot more than we thought. So we thought that it would be maybe $1 million or $2 million to prevent a large accident. In practice, it was 15 to 20 million every time an incident happened. And it was only through this practice of going out on the field on a regular basis and really engaging, not in offices, but on mine sites, that we started to understand how valuable our solution was. And of course, discovering new problems only happens in the field. If you're not the first in at 8 a.m. and the last out at 11 p.m., you're not doing your accelerator right. That was the best advice about going on an accelerator program that I ever received. And that was from one of the mentors of Entrepreneur First. You may not have heard of Entrepreneur First, but they've actually now overturned Y Combinator as the technology accelerator with the highest return on investment. To put some figures around this, when they started in 2015, their fund only had 8.5 million to allocate. But by 2016, the fund was worth $270 million, a huge return on investment. Why? Not only was their accelerator incredibly hardcore, it's intense, it's robust with great mentoring, but the mentors, before you even got onto the program, were really straightforward about this and laid out very clearly what the expectations were. They made it really clear that an accelerator program is just that. It's an accelerator. It's an unusual sprint of time whereby you're working unusually hard for a short burst to accelerate your business forward. And with accelerator programs of this intensity, there's usually a 50% dropout rate, which remains to be the case. But knowing in advance how hard it's going to be, but that there's an end to it and that it's worth it, and you only have to stick it out for a short sprint, and you never have to work that hard in your business again, fingers crossed, it allows you to really get to the end of it. So to add to this, what were the other big lessons that I got from my accelerator experience? Firstly, you get out what you put into a pre-accelerator and accelerator program. It's not university, so you don't have to expect your mentors to do everything for you, and in fact, they won't. Finding investors and clients for your demo day is your responsibility, not your mentors. Invitations to demo day need to go out at the midpoint of your accelerator sprint to make sure you get the right people to see you at demo day. And you don't get what you don't ask for. Leverage the networks your accelerator has to gain access to clients and feedback early on. Those who only hunt whales often go hungry. In 2018, we were in negotiations for a $500,000 deal with a major Australian client. We thought this was going really well month one. We also thought this was going really well month two. By month four, we still kind of thought this was going pretty well. By month 6, we had signed legal contracts and the client backed out 2 days before deployment was due, and the entire project got dropped. Over this period, we were so focused on this whale of a client that we ignored all of our other clients and pooled our resources into this one, which meant that we had no backups. And not only did we not have no backups, we had also run up unofficial debt during this process because we had asked lawyers who were reviewing our contracts, we'd asked contractors, we'd asked suppliers to take a rain check on the payment until we had got cash in the bank from our client to pay them off. So we were left stranded with no clients, in debt, with our hands in the air, just thinking, what are we going to do next? Because on paper, we actually had a really good case to sue our client, but in practice, they knew that we wouldn't because we had been bled dry at that point. And we just had to let it go and move on and just learn a harsh lesson that no matter how shiny that contract looks and how close it is to closing, until cash is in the bank, it's never closed. And until that point, make sure you keep your options open and don't go out and only hunt whales. This is especially relevant with navigating the resources sector pipeline. Important lesson learned was to never give products or services away for free. If no one is willing to pay for an early version of your product, it simply isn't a valuable product. Always have a minimum of 6 clients in your pipeline. Resources contracts are a beast of their own. They'll take 3 to 6 months to close and have 90-day payment terms. This presents a unique challenge to startups operating in the space, whereby instead of having immediate consumer-facing payments that can only take a few days, you just have to make sure that you plan your cash flows a bit further in advance to make sure that you can survive those 90-day payment terms. Be aware that some corporations, I'm talking internationally or Australia specific here, will deliberately drag out negotiations with startups to see if you can survive for more than a year. And they deem that if you have survived that year, you're then worthy of working with. However, I've seen a lot of startups take these negotiations at face value and just crash because they burnt all of their runway up waiting for that whale to come through, and it never did. And they were playing a game that these young companies had no idea that they were even playing. Finally, with targeting, as just useful information, tier 1 resources companies never undertake a pilot. The best thing to do in the resources sector is to target tier 3 clients for early businesses. So these are companies with less than 200 people. They can move a lot faster. They're usually a bit more open-minded. And sometimes they have been through the early stage of business themselves, maybe a decade ago. So they're a little bit more sympathetic and they're a bit more adventurous. It's not to say tier 1 clients are bad, they're actually superb, they're the whales, but tier 3, when you're starting out, is the best place to make fast sales and just get to a point of consistent revenue as quickly as possible. Ordinary geese and magic geese look exactly the same. On another deal, we wasted 4 months pitching to really enthusiastic middle managers. And again, month one, we thought this was a really good idea. Month 2, also a good idea. But by month 4, we couldn't understand why every single meeting we were having was going really, really well. And we had so much enthusiasm and so much willingness to work with us and so many callbacks. And yet we couldn't close, and we didn't understand why we couldn't close. And it was until we got the advice through our accelerator, actually, to really ask more directly, very early on in negotiations. So who does have the sign-off power? Who's pulling the strings here? In a very polite and sympathetic yet assertive way fast on. In the end, as soon as we found out that that was the case, we sharpened up and then started asking much more directly, so who is the person who has the sign-off power? We discovered that they were in a completely different side of the business. They were not in offices, they were the general manager of the site. And through that process, we learned that for our clients, at least, the ones who had sign-off power were general managers who can sign off almost any amount of cash on the site, and technical managers who are usually based on site as well, don't spend much time in offices, and they have sign-off power of about $9,000 for a tier 2. And knowing that, we were then finally able to segment our contracts, make them much more faster, much more small, and get them approved a lot faster. So of course, am I selling to the right person? Ask very early on who has sign-off power for the amount of money you're charging for your client. Don't waste months accidentally pitching to enthusiastic potentials who can't make your project happen. Every landscape has its idiosyncrasies. I was trained by Silicon Valley mentors, and when it came to raise our seed capital round, after having navigated all of those growing pains and hurdles early on, again, nothing was going according to plan. We couldn't work out why we just couldn't close a seed round. We weren't in debt, we had quite healthy numbers, and yet it just wasn't happening for us. We did close our round, and we only realized about month 7 or month 8 into that the reason we were going wrong is because we were applying the rules of one game to a different game and then being surprised that it didn't work. The US is not Australia, Australia is not the US. Even within that, there are different rules, unspoken rules, and more etiquette rather than rules, I should say, for doing business and navigating capital raising. We finally had that aha moment of, we need to stop trying to force these rules that we've been taught are correct onto the people that we're dealing with directly. And we switched our approach to it. We went, okay, so we don't know anything. We shouldn't be trying to apply one set of rules to the current ecosystem. So let's just start from scratch. We took a bit of a break and a deep breath and went, what does work here? How can we navigate this? So we changed. Instead of pitch decks, we did information memorandums, much longer, more magazine-like material with robust financials behind them. We started asking around and working with brokers. We started looking into crowdfunding platforms. We started looking into grants as well. And then finally, when we completely changed our mentality and just went, okay, it's not working. And people like to move more slowly, and that's fine. We just need to be able to keep up with their pace for what works for them. That's when we were finally able to close our seed round and get to the next stage of business. So raising startup capital. Australia is not Silicon Valley. Expect seed level negotiations to take 12 months to close and expect to have a 1 in 70 success rate, which was what our success rate was. Which by comparison in the US, it's about 1 in 10 to 1 in 20 if you've survived to the point where you're raising seed capital. Do your due diligence on your investors, something that we found out as well. It's completely common practice for investors to be doing due diligence on you. Why not do due diligence on them? You need to find out who you're working with. All it takes is to ask for a quick run through of who their previous investments are and just talk to the founders. They'll always be happy to chat to you. And you're able to find out really quickly that way who's great to work with, who's not so great to work with. Once you make a deal, even if it may seem like the best thing for your company at that time, you're going to be working with these people for about a decade moving ahead. So you need to make sure that you have a good relationship with them, that they're easy to work with, that they kind of get where you're coming from. Now, having said all of that, I think Australia is the best country in the world for pre-seed capital, which is under $500,000. And it's really, really easy to raise in Australia. And this is why every landscape has its own idiosyncrasies. Every landscape has its pros and its cons. Australia, for the phase of business that you're going into with the pre-accelerator, is the perfect market to start in. Grants here have a 1 in 3 to 1 in 10 success rate. By comparison, grants in the UK have a 1 in 1,000 success rate. Here, accelerator program grants and angel investments of under $20,000 are the main sources of capital. And the marketplace is now ready for up and coming tech and resources startups. They're keen to do it, they want to do it. Sometimes they don't know how to do it, and that's fine. Just be willing to work with them and trust yourself and your instincts. And finally, close fast or lose your round. Especially for smaller investments of 20,000 under, you have about 2 weeks to close. After that point, your investor will get bored, they'll get distracted, or there'll be a family issue that you just have no control over, which will take you out of it. So yeah, bear that in mind. 2 weeks to close. That's all of the major findings that I wish I had known when I was setting up my company almost 4 years ago now, and especially when we came over to Australia. So I do sincerely hope that that helps and that will make things a bit easier for you going forward. And I wish you all the best of luck in your successes, for they are coming. Thank you. I will now stop sharing my screen and open to the floor.
That was awesome, Alex. Thank you so much. As you were talking, I was like, yeah, totally. Yeah, she's so right. Yeah, we're going to talk about that in the program. So yeah, so many good insights. Thank you so much for that. We already have one question here, and guys, please keep shouting questions. So a question from Caitlin. How did you get to talk to that first mine site? How did you approach them, and how did you get them to trust what you were doing, given that the tech had a bad rep in the industry?
Good questions. So what helped a lot with that was warm introductions from our accelerator mentors. And I probably should have been more clear about this. We went on the Unearthed Accelerator in 2017 in Australia. And I imagine this is going to be really similar with Core. One of the best things about accelerator programs is the networks that they deliver to you, and also that personal touch. If we had tried to reach out to that client on our own, we might not have gotten rejected, but it would have been a lot harder. The fact that we had lead mentors giving us warm introductions off the back of the accelerator, like, yeah, they're doing something really exciting, and acknowledging it, like, yeah, there has been a bad rep with this industry, but the way we're doing this is completely different, and here's why, and not patronizing them and going, well, let's break down a quick 1-minute summary of how this technology works and why it's different to everything that's come before. And also take a punt on us in the sense of what's the worst that can happen. We built that relationship over a period of time. But the thing that really propelled us forward were warm introductions from our accelerator mentors got us in the door. And without that, we would not have been able to probably drum up any business in Australia if we just arrived here left on our own devices without that guidance.
Cool. Amazing. And we're going to talk more about that and when I explain about the program. But one of the things that we have is really the industry mentoring. So we have a one-on-one pairing, and then each startup will get someone from the industry. And one of their main goals is to open doors and do those warm introductions that we agree is so important. So another one here from Lainey. Can you talk a little bit more about leveraging networks? How did you approach this, particularly given you didn't have established networks when you arrived? I feel like you have already started to answer this one.
Yes and no. As well as the warm introductions, my co-founder Rob and I had extra impetus on moving to Australia because we were also in a new country. And as soon as we touched down, we had 6 months to get to a point where we could survive on our own 2 feet as an independent company, or we were going to get deported. So we had extra impetus to just hit it really, really hard. So what we did as soon as we arrived is, I think it was either 3 nights or 5 nights a week we went to networking events, and we went together and we went religiously. And we were just enthusiastic, introduced ourselves, spoke to everyone that we could, and just threw ourselves out there. So the fastest way to get those intros is go to networking events. And when you're on the accelerator, do them every night of the week. And the more I think about this, no, we did do it every single night of the week for about 6 months. We had weekends off. Mostly we had weekends off. But again, that comes around to it being just accepting this is going to be a really, really intense period, and it will come to an end. And you have a limited amount of time to do everything you can in 3 or 6 months. So if that's the timeline you're working to, of course you have to go to networking events every night of the week. Because you never know someone who knows someone, and it works. And just being pleasant as well, like being just happy to chat to people always helps.
Yeah, people, always. Okay, so we have another one here. Hi, Alex. My name is Dave, and I work for a Queensland Code company. How do you see your company product developing further? I'm having a hard time reading this question. Especially UG coal, where flameproof is an issue.
All right, so to bring some context for those who aren't aware, that's underground coal, and you have to meet intrinsic safety requirements in order to function underground. So for that, yeah, we found out very early on that we would have to hit intrinsic safety regulations and standards. We came from it from an unusual perspective. We, having had designed for manned space exploration, we found that those same requirements were basically the same as intrinsic safety requirements. So we came into it with people going, it's going to be so difficult, we'll never be able to do it. And then we looked at the specification sheet and went, like, we're actually used to working in this style. So for underground, all of our equipment, I think especially the equipment that we're actually about to launch our new generation of device in November, roughly November this year, is being built to intrinsic safety. We take great care in the way that we document everything and make sure we work to industry standards. However, before that, because there are so many use cases underground that just haven't really been touched by technology companies yet, you can't pilot underground, and you have to be able to rigorously test your equipment before you start going underground, and it has to be on site. So the way that we navigated the pilot process is our first ever pilot was actually in an office. It was people falling asleep at 4 a.m. whilst in a control room. Validated that, we went to a next step with a different client, which was then overground mining, but only restricted to certain areas where intrinsic safety wasn't required. And then we ended up working in, I think, parallels or verticals, like some side of the industry that was electricity generation, where we had a whole site to play with that had no intrinsic safety requirements whatsoever. So baby steps and really obsessive anal documentation is how we navigate that.
Cool, thank you. Now another one on pricing. Very tempting to give away the prototype for free. How did you arrive at price for your first customers?
Ooh, that's a good question. How did we arrive at the first price for our first customer? In a sense, we didn't, which is the interesting thing. If we changed the business model so that we were selling pilots of products, and we sold the return on investment for a period of time with the pilot rather than for an individual product. That was the best thing for our company. We're only now transitioning to post-pilot payment models where it's about $500 per annum per subscription. So we do hardware as a service, which is an emerging field, where you don't buy a product, you kind of rent it, but it comes with all of the bells and whistles of software and analytics platforms as well that comes with it. And it's taken us 4 years to work out what the best pricing model is for that. So before we got to that point, we knew that we had a big enough problem that was costing millions of dollars for companies. So I think our first pricing was $200,000, which was the first thing that worked for us. And then we started realizing that, yeah, that was good, but that was kind of too lucky. We then expected all of our negotiations to go like that, and they didn't. So then we did another readjust, and we started doing 6-week-long projects priced at 30,000, which were easier to get over the line. And then that started working. So painful trial and error. And then finally, just before you launch to market properly and you get out of the pilot, what we also did actually a few weeks ago is we hired a resources sector marketing specialist that we really trusted and built a relationship over. And we went like, look, we can't just do a rough estimate of this is what our competitors are charging and we think that we should be somewhere in the middle. Like, we only have one chance at launching this product. We need to get more specific than that. And we don't have the time or the resources to look into this. Can we hire you to do a market sentiment survey of about 100 industry professionals to work out exactly what the pricing model should be? So she did that, and she went over and beyond. I think she got 150 to respond and take our survey. And it was only through that process we then went like, no, like about 550 is what we need to hit. And that completely, it made us change the model for launching as well. We were going to do initial hardware purchase with a follow-on subscription, which to us seemed like the best idea, but one also needs to be aware that you're always in a bubble. So by breaking out of that bubble with the help of this marketing agency, we then like again overturned all of our assumptions and went like, thank God we did this now, half a year before launch, rather than using our pre-existing pricing model, which if we had stuck with this, I think would probably have tanked us.
Interesting. Okay, another one. Can you talk about what you have learned as a startup about engaging with the industry? Did you find them open, dismissive? How did you ensure that you were taken seriously?
I have many stories about this. I'll do one comparison. So when I was starting to attend mining industry conferences in London, I remember being very clearly taken aside after a few drinks by two people who were really well-meaning. There was a quite young lady who was on the executive path and engineering path in mining, had been onto the field in South Africa a few times. And then another like almost C-suite guy. They took me to one side and went, Alex, before you go to Australia and before you start working with miners, you're gonna have to change the way you speak. Like, you just can't speak like that. They're just gonna hate you. You just basically have to change everything about yourself. I sat there and I went, doesn't quite feel right, but okay. I mean, also I'm bad at accents. I can't do any other accents. So I was like, well, thanks for that, but I can't do anything with this information because my voice just like, I'm just bad at impressions, so thanks. And then when I actually started going out onto site and meeting people and just meeting individuals in general for that early validation stage and going onwards, like just being yourself and respecting people and listening to people. And I found that as soon as I went onto site, I really wouldn't change anything about myself. I'll just think about what's sincere to me. I'm not going to put any pretense on. Especially for initial validation, I would just sit there in a crib room on site with a pen and paper and some coffees next to me, and people will just come up and start talking to me. And people just want to be listened to. And if you give them the time and the space and the time of day and go, well, what are your problems? What's really going on? You know, let's go get a beer later and let's really chat. And then they go and introduce you to their friends that they're working with. I'm thinking specifically of like some gold mining people. And I got the complete opposite feedback from them. It's like, well, we really appreciate the fact that you're very authentic with us, that like you haven't changed your accent in any way, and that most importantly, that you're listening to us and you like give a shit about our problems. So thank you for that.
That's amazing. Very, very good. Thank you. I know that Tessa also had a question for you. Tessa, would you like to ask that?
Yeah, my favorite question to ask people that are successful is, how do you deal with the imposter syndrome? Have you ever had moments where you're like, I'm in over my head, what am I doing? Have you had those moments along your journey?
Heavy drinking. No, like partially. No, I mean, I came into it from a different industry as well. So I did have a background running businesses in the fashion industry and the art world. And I'd encountered some high profile technology entrepreneurs. I mean, not super high profile, like not in the publics, but they'd sold their company for a few $100 million. And it was so great to hear them talk that they had imposter syndrome. And there was one guy who was raising a $500 million round off the back of his last sale of his company. And he just sat like, I don't know why they're trusting me with their money. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know why I'm here. I was like, you've just sold your company for 200 million. Like, you very much know what you're doing. And just that equalizer, and encountering that in the fashion industry as well, of people who've been on the cover of Vogue and like, I don't know why they keep using me. I kind of hate myself. I don't know why I'm here. So that recognition of like, everyone has it. And when everyone has something, no one has something, because it's an equalized playing field. And to recognize that although you might go through periods of having imposter syndrome, everyone has that. So it's nothing to worry about.
Yeah, it's very good. All right, another one. Co-founders, aside from the vesting shareholder agreement, your insights on how to get to know your colleagues early as to avoid lawsuits and the like heavy drinking.
Sorry, what's the question there? Just a comment or just
insights on how to get to know your colleagues.
Ah, sorry. Is heavy drinking the best way to get to know your colleagues? Sometimes. Is working at a hackathon the best way to get to know your colleagues? Sometimes. The only way you ever know someone is by going through a crisis with them. And that's really it. Like, you can encounter someone who's the most chill person ever, but then they are suddenly dealt with, like, yeah, I remember dealing with letters of people intending to sue, and then really finding out who could actually deal with the crisis. And that's why vesting shareholder agreements are important, to give you that year, because in that year you're going to have crises, and that's fine. You should expect them. It's just part of the journey. And it's only in those moments that you see someone's true colors. So I wish I could give you a quick fix to that. I guess cause trouble, get into crises, with your co-founders, and then you'll find out whether you can work together or not when that happens.
Cool, awesome. So we have one final question from the audience, and then I'm gonna give Renee to have the final question before we head this up. So what keeps you up at night the most?
Everything. It's sort of a fair question. I mean, I'm also a night owl as well, so I've really had to work very hard to adjust to the early bird schedule that Brisbane has. I mean, what keeps me up at night? Usually stuff to do with my business. The great existential crises of this world. What's going on with politics? How can I fix that? Is what I'm doing meaningful? Could I be doing this better? What am I going to do tomorrow? When am I going to have time to go to the gym? How are my relationships going? I mean, all of that comes into it. So from that, the important takeaway is the importance of a support network, because you're always going to have problems that keep you up at night. And there was one initiative that I joined that was in River City Labs a few years ago, which was the 4 a.m. Club. And it was a group by founders for founders. And we would all sit in a circle, and it was like being in tech entrepreneur AA meetings. And we go around the circle, and we'd like fold up all the questions and our concerns and put them in the hat. And then the leader would read them out. And most of them were basically the same as everyone else's. And as part of that, you would have a pact with 1 or 2 other people to say, okay, you can call me at any time, be that midnight, be that 4 a.m, and I will always pick up. And building those relationships of people who can support you in the good times and the bad times. They don't have to be work colleagues, they don't have to be industry people, they can be your best friends. But it's important to have at least really five people who you can count on at any time, and they'll help you through not being able to sleep at 3 a.m. because you're just too stressed out about the next day, or you don't know how you're going to get over the next issue. And that emotional support is as important as professional business mentoring. And that will really push you through on the journey.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Renee, you want to ask the final one?
Yes, happy to. Thank you. I actually think you touched on something that I was going to ask you about, Alex. I'm going to ask you something different, but I really want to pick up on the fact that you've mentioned today how important it is to have a group of mentors and advisors around you, and I hope that people have got a sense of how big the circle is, or the village is, that you need to be able to take your startup forward. These don't have to be all people that are on your team. They're not paid staff, they're not founders, but they all play a role in advising either you personally or advising where the business goes. And I think you've spoken really well today to how important it is to have that circle around you. You can make comment on that further if you like, but I really wanted to ask you, what's next? What's the future for Canaria and for you, and where do you see yourself taking this thing in the future?
Sure. Well, first up with that question about, it takes a village to raise a child. It's the same for a company. I mean, a number off the top of my head, people who I would consider informal advisors alongside, we do have a formal advisory board in place. It's probably about 30 people that we can rely on at most time to call up and ask a question or get some feedback on something, or go have lunch with and find out what their opinion about the industry is and where we should be going next. So yeah, it's pretty wide. It gets wide fast actually, which is good. You need that input. Where do we see next? The mission statement is to become the world leader in predictive biometric systems. So we have our launch of our new Canaria Earpiece V coming out later 2020. So this is the final, it's the full circle moment for the company. If the original concept was a wireless earpiece worn behind the ear with predictive capabilities, it's that. And it took us 4 years and 5 generations of hardware to crack it. So we're really looking forward to having a soft launch at the end of this year and getting those earpieces out in the field with a few clients. And I mean, it's hard to plan a hard launch right now, isn't it? Because I love like the Tesla style like cocktails press launches, and you can't really do those at the moment. So we'll see what 2021 holds for us. But yeah, our aim for the foreseeable future, that's not the long mission statement, is to be the best predictive biometrics company in the resources, aerospace and defense sector. So with our hardware, we've really done the heavy lifting now. And now it's a matter of us, now that we can have these less than 1% inaccurate medical grade vital signs, building enough of a data set to wind it back into it again. So the beauty with our hardware, which is also what we took so long to build and put so much effort into building, is that once it's there, we can do software updates and add new features really, really quickly. So right now, our devices can do heat exhaustion and cognitive fatigue prediction 10 minutes before it happens, based on the historical data of our users. You need to wear them for about 3 weeks for it to get used to your individual metrics. But we can update quite quickly with, say, asphyxiation prediction for low oxygen areas, or man down alerts for remote workers. And apart from that, I don't know, we need to go back into the field again, I think, once we've got those next two, and work out, well, what are the problems that we don't know about yet that we could do a software update and fix.
Absolutely fantastic. And we really hope that you succeed, because I feel like everyone would benefit a lot from what you're doing. So thank you so much. It was an amazing session, so many good insights. And yeah, I think that's it.